A young couple came to see me 2 summers back, with a receipt in hand, more proud than anything, having just spent nearly $90 on a peach tree from a big display outside a home store on their way through town. Healthy-looking thing, good colour, full of promise sitting there in its black plastic pot. They planted it that same weekend with real care and real excitement. That tree never set one single peach in the 3 years they owned it. It never would have, not in that yard, not ever. The variety they bought needed a cold winter. It was simply never going to get where they lived. Nobody at that display, nobody on that tag, ever mentioned it. They had bought a tree that was wrong for their address before they ever put a shovel in the ground. They are far from the only ones. I have lost count of the calls I get every spring from someone standing in their own yard, staring at a tree that leaves out fine and flowers fine and simply never sets fruit, wondering what they did wrong in the care of it. Almost every single time the honest answer has nothing to do with care at all. The decision that mattered most had already been made and settled, for better or worse, on the day the tree left the lot. I am Hollis, and in 50 years of growing fruit trees on this same ground and helping plenty of neighbours get their own start, the single most expensive mistake I watch people make happens before the tree is ever planted. It happens at the point of purchase, standing in front of a display, choosing on looks and price and a friendly-sounding name. The actual decision that determines everything is a handful of questions almost nobody thinks to ask. Rootstock, which governs the eventual size and how the tree takes to your soil, is its own separate decision, and I have covered that one at length elsewhere. What I want to cover today comes before rootstock even enters the conversation. It is the choice of which variety and which species actually belongs in your yard at all, and it is where I see more money wasted than anywhere else in this whole business. Here is the mechanism worth understanding before the list itself. A fruit tree is not a general-purpose plant, the way a shrub or a lawn grass often is. Each variety carries a fairly narrow set of requirements around winter cold, pollination partners, mature size, and local disease pressure. These traits were bred and selected over generations for a fairly specific set of conditions, often a specific region entirely. Buy outside that window, and no amount of good soil or careful watering afterward will fix it. The tree simply was never going to do what you bought it to do, and no amount of good intentions after the fact changes that starting point. This is different from almost anything else sold at a garden centre. A shrub or an ornamental grass will generally get by across a wide range of conditions and simply look a little better or a little worse, depending on the site. A fruit tree either meets its specific requirements closely enough to fruit, or it survives perfectly well and never fruits at all. There is very little middle ground, which is exactly why the purchase decision carries so much more weight here than it does almost anywhere else in the yard. Number 1. Whether the variety actually gets enough winter cold where you live. Most temperate fruit trees need a minimum number of hours below about 45 degrees each winter before they will break dormancy and flower properly the following spring. This is called the chill hour requirement, and it varies enormously between varieties, sometimes by hundreds of hours within the very same species. A peach bred for a mild winter region, planted somewhere with a genuinely cold climate, will flower unevenly or late. It will lose a season to a lingering frost more often than not. The reverse mistake is just as common and just as costly. A high chill variety planted somewhere with a mild winter never satisfies its requirement at all. Its buds simply never open properly, year after year, no matter how healthy the tree otherwise looks. This information is almost always available from the grower or the extension service for your specific region, and it costs nothing beyond 10 minutes of looking before you buy. Ask the specific chill hour number for the exact variety, not a vague regional suitability label on a generic tag, which is often written broadly enough to cover several climates. It does not actually suit well. Number 2. Whether the variety needs a second tree to produce any fruit at all. Many fruit trees, including the great majority of apples and most sweet cherries, are not self-fertile. They need pollen from a genuinely different, compatible variety blooming at roughly the same time in order to set fruit. Plant one alone expecting a full harvest, and you may get flowers every spring and almost nothing to show for them. Ask directly whether the exact variety you are buying is self-fertile or requires a pollinator. If it needs one, ask which specific varieties bloom close enough in timing to actually do the job. A late blooming variety and an early blooming one planted as a pair will often miss each other entirely despite standing right beside one another for years. Most growers publish a bloom time chart for their major varieties, usually grouped into early, mid and late season windows. Two varieties from the same window are almost always a safe pairing, while a variety from the earliest window paired with one from the latest window is the pairing most likely to miss each other and leave you with flowers and no fruit. This costs nothing extra if caught before purchase, since it simply means buying two trees instead of one from the start. The alternative is discovering the gap 3 seasons in and having to add a second tree afterward, which delays your first real harvest by several more years on top of what you have already waited. Number 3. What the tree will actually weigh and measure at full maturity, not at purchase. A tree sold in a small pot gives almost no visual sense of its eventual size. Eventual size is governed heavily by rootstock, which is its own decision I have covered elsewhere. The variety and species themselves also carry a natural mature size range worth asking about directly. Well before rootstock is even chosen, a standard-sized apple or pecan can eventually reach 30 feet across and just as tall, which is simply the wrong choice for a small suburban lot, regardless of how appealing the fruit sounds on the tag. Ask for the mature spread in feet for the specific rootstock and variety combination you are considering, not a vague description like compact or space-saving. Measuring your actual available planting space with a tape before you shop and bringing that number with you turns a vague guess into a concrete filter you can apply against every tree on the lot. Number 4. Whether the variety carries any real resistance to the diseases common in your specific region. Fire blight, scab and various fungal cankers hit some varieties far harder than others. Plant breeders have spent decades developing resistant selections within nearly every major fruit species, specifically because of this uneven risk. A variety with poor resistance planted in a region where that disease runs heavy will often struggle every single year regardless of how well it is otherwise cared for. Ask your local extension service, not the nursery salesperson, which diseases run heaviest in your specific area. Then ask the grower directly whether the variety you are considering carries documented resistance to that particular problem. This single question alone has saved more of my neighbour's trees than any spray program ever has. This costs nothing beyond the research itself, and often the resistant variety costs exactly the same as the susceptible one sitting right beside it on the same display. Number 5. Whether you are buying bare root or already potted, and what that changes about what to inspect. Bare root trees, sold dormant with no soil around the roots, are typically cheaper and establish a stronger root system in many climates, but they are only available during a narrow dormant season window and need planting quickly after purchase. Potted trees are available nearly year-round and more forgiving of a delayed planting date, generally at a higher price. Whichever you choose, inspect the roots directly before buying if the seller allows it. On a bare root tree, look for numerous fine white feeder roots, not just a handful of thick woody ones. On a potted tree, gently ease it partway from the pot and check the roots have not begun circling tightly around the inside wall, which signals it has sat in that pot too long. A root-bound tree, left uncorrected at planting, will often struggle to ever properly anchor itself in your native soil, no matter how carefully everything above ground is handled afterward. Number 6. Where the tree actually came from, not just where you are standing when you buy it. A big display outside a general retailer is frequently supplied by a large regional grower, shipping the same handful of popular varieties to every store in a wide area, without much regard for whether that specific variety suits your specific climate zone. A dedicated fruit tree nursery, by contrast, is far more likely to stock varieties actually selected for your region. This does not mean every big display purchase is a mistake, since occasionally the varieties do line up correctly, but it does mean the burden of asking the chill hour and disease resistance questions above falls entirely on you at a big display, where staff are rarely trained specifically in fruit tree selection the way a dedicated grower's staff typically are. A specialty nursery often costs somewhat more per tree, sometimes an extra $10 to $20, but that difference is frequently smaller than the cost of a tree that never fruits at all. Number 7. What the tags chill hour and hardiness numbers are actually measuring. Since generic tags often round broadly, many mass market tags list only a wide hardiness zone range, and nothing about chill hour specifically, because the zone number describes winter cold tolerance for survival, not the separate and more specific number that governs whether flowering and fruiting will actually happen well. A tree can be perfectly hardy for your zone, meaning it will not freeze and die over winter, while still being a poor chill hour match, meaning it survives just fine, but rarely fruits properly. These are two different questions, and a tag answering only the first one is not actually answering the question that determines whether you get fruit. Asking the grower directly for the specific chill hour figure, rather than relying on the zone number alone, closes this gap for free. Number 8. How many years you should honestly expect to wait before a meaningful first harvest. Different species and different rootstock combinations bear their first real crop anywhere from 2 to 3 years after planting for a dwarfing apple, out to 5 to 7 years or more for a standard-sized pecan or a full-sized cherry. Buying without asking this question sets an expectation that reality then fails to meet, and that gap is where a lot of genuine disappointment and needless second-guessing comes from. Ask directly for the specific variety and rootstock combination you are buying, roughly how many years until a meaningful first crop, and write that number down somewhere you will actually see it again. It turns a vague sense of impatience 3 years in into a simple, already answered question. Here is what you can actually do tonight if you have not bought yet, or even if you already have. Write down your specific hardiness zone, and more importantly, your region's typical winter chill hour range, which your local extension service can usually confirm in a single phone call or a quick search of their published tables. If you already own a tree that has never fruited well, check its chill hour requirement against your actual regional numbers before assuming disease, pests, or poor care are to blame. Sometimes the honest answer is simply that the variety was never going to succeed where it was planted, and that is worth knowing plainly, rather than chasing a fix that was never available. Before your next purchase, write these 8 questions on your phone and actually ask them out loud at the point of sale. Most sellers respect a buyer who asks specific questions, and the ones who cannot answer them are telling you something important about how well that particular tree was actually matched to your yard. If you feel awkward asking a stranger this many questions, remember that a genuine grower wants to sell you a tree that succeeds, since a happy customer comes back for the next one and tells their neighbors besides. A seller who gets defensive or dismissive at a simple chill hour question is usually telling you they do not actually know the answer, which is worth knowing before you spend the money rather than after. It also helps to shop with a short written list rather than trying to remember 8 separate points on the spot. Standing in front of a display with a tree already halfway into your cart, a folded index card with these 8 questions kept in a jacket pocket or a phone note turns an intimidating conversation into a simple checklist you work through calmly, one line at a time. I keep a running list of every variety I've planted here, its chill hour number, its pollination partner if it needs one, and the year it first bore real fruit. It has saved me from repeating my own mistakes more than once, and I would genuinely recommend the same habit to anyone starting out. I have put together a complete orchard planning guide covering chill hour tables by region, pollination partner charts for the most common fruit species, and a full worksheet for exactly these 8 questions to bring with you to any nursery. It is linked below if you want the fuller version of everything covered here today. That peach the young couple bought never did bear fruit. 3 years later they pulled it and planted a different variety in its place, one actually suited to their winter. It fruited the very first eligible season. Nothing about their soil or their care had ever been the problem. The tree itself was simply never going to work where it stood, and no one had told them that before they paid for it. They still keep that first receipt, oddly enough, tucked in a kitchen drawer as a reminder. Not out of bitterness, they told me, but because it is the cheapest lesson either of them ever learned about anything, $90 and 3 lost seasons against what would have been a 10-minute conversation at the point of sale. 50 years of this work has taught me that the cheapest fix in the whole orchard is the one you make before you ever buy the tree. Every dollar spent asking the right question at the point of sale saves several years, and several times that dollar figure later on, once a tree that was never going to succeed is already 3 years into the ground, and everybody involved is left wondering why. So, before your next trip to any nursery, whether it is this week or next spring, write those 8 questions down somewhere you will actually carry with you. It is the shortest, cheapest piece of homework in the entire life of an orchard, and it is the one small step almost nobody ever actually bothers to take before handing over their money.